The most dramatic events unfolding in Europe since the end of World War II, with Russia's Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, a looming Supreme Court battle with an African American woman at the center of it all, President Biden's first State of the Union address, Beto O'Rourke's political comeback as he's now the Democratic Party's standard bearer to face off against Texas Governor Greg Abbott in the fall, and the January 6th committee says it has evidence showing Trump committed crimes, including obstruction and fraud, while trying to overturn the election. Welcome back to the Political Mic. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to be back. And I'm glad to have these outstanding guests that I have for tonight. My apologies for Professor McDougall's absence for tonight, but I'm so glad that Nate Honore, who is one of my favorite guests, stepped in. So we have Mr. Nate Honore, who is a 3L at Quinnipiac University School of Law. Professor Preston Foster, who is the director of the Public Policy Program at Oakwood University, graduate of the Kennedy School at Harvard, and is also a contributor and founder of whattheyshouldsay.org. We have Mr. Stephen Foster, who's also a contributor and founder of whattheyshouldsay.org, and who's also another brilliant mind to have as it pertains to public policy and global affairs. And we also have Professor Fred Cook, another favorite professor of mine of Howard University School of Law, who is also a practicing attorney. I'm glad that each of you gentlemen made time for tonight, but I did make a promise to the viewers before we start diving into the discussion topics. There will be a giveaway. We are giving away the Political Mic face masks, and so there was a promotion in light of this episode, and I want to make good on that promise. And again, if you answer correctly this political history trivia question, you can win a mask just like this one. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask the question. And the question is, which U.S. president convinced the U.S. Olympic Committee to refrain from competing in the 1980 Moscow Olympics in response to the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan? Which U.S. president convinced the U.S. Olympic Committee to refrain from competing in the 1980 Moscow Olympics in response to the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan? And again, go ahead and answer in the comments. You can DM me. However, the first three will get the masks. And as soon as I give you confirmation that you're one of the first three, go ahead and send me your mailing address so I can send you this nice mask. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. So much has happened since this platform has been made live. Most recently of which Russia has now deliberately taken action that really counters all of which, specific post-World War II institutions like the United Nations were designed to prevent. And so we have President Biden getting criticism from the left and the right, primarily the right, as it pertains to his response. And so I want to ask you, gentlemen, what grade would you give the Biden administration in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Anyone can jump in.
Are you talking about just the response or the run-up to where we are? I think he gets a good grade, for the response. But there's more to it than that, and that's sort of what my hesitance in my voice might be. I think he's done a pretty good job of rallying countries around the world to respond in the way they have, at least, to what the Russians have done, what Mr. Putin has done. But there's really not a whole lot of options unless you want to engage in or walk up to the precipice of thermonuclear war by punching the Russian military machine in the nose. There's not a whole lot of options beyond where Mr. Biden has sort of mobilized countries around the world to do.
Mr. Foster, go ahead and
I'll give him a B plus. Given our perspective, I'll give him a B plus. And to Professor Cook's point, the options are limited, and I think he's used every practical option there is. I think he's taking these sanctions to as far an extent as possible. without crippling our economy from an energy standpoint in particular. But my take on this whole thing is probably a little off the beaten path, because I see, and I think we're limited in terms of the information that we get on this side of the ocean. But I understand. I'm not defending Putin in any way, but I understand his perspective. He sees NATO completely differently than we do. And NATO is expanding eastward. There's no question about that. If you look at a map of NATO countries, NATO allied countries from 40 years ago, and then compare it to that same map of NATO allied countries now, you'll see that a lot of those states, those small states that were once part of the USSR, are now NATO countries, and they're moving ever eastward. So I think he's just taking a stand of, this. You're not going any further than this. So I mean, there's a lot more to it, obviously, and we'll get into it. But I understand his perspective, and his perspective isn't really. I think has been given short rift by our media.
Yeah, I kind of give him a B minus, and it's funny because we're brothers, but we haven't talked about this. But I see it much the same way. I give him a B minus because the president did signal clearly that military action by the United States was off the table. And although that might have been good politically, it's not something you necessarily do strategically in terms of signaling how important it is to you. I've tried to distill what Putin has done as clearly as I can, and basically it's kind of like Stephen was saying. Putin invaded Ukraine before it became a NATO ally. And he saw it becoming a NATO ally as being inevitable. And this encroachment on what was the post-World War II division of the world between the winners of World War II, that is the NATO allies to the west and the Warsaw Pact to the east. As Stephen said, if you look at the Warsaw Pact countries, Ukraine was clearly one of them, and I don't mean to imply at all that he owns it, but in terms of what he saw as his region of the world, we're encroaching. And once you become a NATO ally, you are then eligible for nuclear weapons to be put on your soil in the defense of other NATO allies. And so I think Putin was doing that mostly for local consumption. When I say that, consumption within within Russia, but also because he has a nationalistic. His whole existence is built on the rebuilding of Greater Russia, which in his mind looks like the old USSR.
It's amazing to me that President Biden is twice as unpopular than Vladimir Putin is in the GOP. And so you can't help but think with that, fact, are Republicans rooting for Putin just because him encroaching on this democratic country's sovereignty would make Biden probably look weak in the process? Is this all looked through the lens of a political domestic agenda? And then when you think about Putin in terms of, previous actions he's taken, he's fought the following wars: Chechnya in 1999, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, Syria in 2015. So Putin has a lot of experience in wars. He's won them. He's won all of these wars, and he thinks he could win again. So if Putin can weaken Biden in this process, it's another win for him. And you think about the role he played in the spread of disinformation, and you think about the role he's playing now in that same tactic in trying to use figures like Tucker Carlson, who's going on the air saying, why are we against Putin on this? And Trump and Pompeo, who are, basically, being Putin's cheerleaders, in this situation, and trying to portray these people as being representative of what the majority of the folks in the United States believe and feel. But I think he's failing miserably. Any other thoughts?
Just real quickly, because I do want to hear what Nathan has to say on this. But from my point of view, one of the best things that the president did that was highly unusual is that he basically went public with CIA information about the planned false flag operations of Russia. That's something that's a card you normally don't play face up. But playing that face up ahead of time, I think, took Putin's plan A out of play.
No, yeah, I agree with that. I think that, part of the challenge here is that Putin is not really being rational. That is to say, he has a worldview of Russia and its place in the world order that is inconsistent with the reality of where Russia is. I mean, it is physically the largest country on the planet, but its economy is not much bigger than that of Italy. The ability of the Russian machine to influence folks around the world has been significantly diminished because they don't really have any economic power. They can't make the investments that China has made around the world. They can't make the investments that the U.S. is making around the world. And the only way he can continue to be a player on the world stage is to threaten everybody with nuclear weapons. And it's a backward-looking philosophy, as both brothers Foster have said, in terms of looking at the USSR as the paradigm he wants to get back to. But I don't know how he does it, because when you think about it, the Russian standing army is less than half the size of the U.S.'s army. They don't have the military machine to coerce people physically around the world. They don't have the economic power to coerce people around the world, but they do have those blinking missiles that they can shoot at you, and that gets everybody's attention.
Well, I would say, as far as the original question, the one thing Biden has done really well is organize this kind of international consensus, get NATO really on the same page, which is huge when you consider the relationship that the past administration, the Trump administration, had with NATO, where Trump actively questioned its use, its activeness, its role, and whether or not the U.S. should continue its status as first among equals within that partnership. So for Biden to come in really within a year and completely rebuild the NATO partnership from the ground up, especially
Sorry, is that better? What I was saying, for Biden to really rebuild the NATO partnership from the ground up, especially with where it was with the Trump administration and how he had a very adversarial relationship with NATO. So for him to come in and really rebuild that and establish this kind of international consensus is a big deal, especially with, a few months ago, with considering how angry the French were at the Biden administration a few months ago, considering the turnover of one of the U.S. most long-standing partners in Germany with the retirement of Chancellor Merkel. So for Biden to actually rebuild this consensus is a big deal. So for that, he deserves credit, as well as the strategy of releasing the information as it came in, saying Russia is determined to attack, even as both Russia and Ukraine were denying the imminence of an attack, even as, even and how correct, really, the intelligence was. American intelligence did really rebuild a lot of credibility, especially as it related to the timing of the attack. So I do think this administration deserves credit for that. However, domestically, it's a little bit of a different story. Biden is unpopular. There are some who think he's trying to drum up a war for, to build up his popularity. There's his unpopularity within the GOP, which is a completely different issue as well. Normally, wars have been a bit more of a bipartisan business than what we're seeing now. But as it develops, there are figures in the GOP which seem determined to kind of give Biden the latitude he needs.
And that's an awesome point, because, we often think of, I guess the layman's way of thinking about Putin and Trump is that they're both one and the same. But it's like, why are they one and the same? Putin saw Trump as a useful idiot. in that Trump was constantly asking publicly, why are we still in NATO? There were reports, not just in Bob Woodward's books, but in other tell-all books that came out of the White House that indicate that Trump repeatedly brought up, the idea of pulling the United States out of NATO, and Putin wanted that. And so, I often thought when this thing was unfolding last week, especially, why did Putin wait until Biden's presidency? Why didn't he do this when conditions seemed to be more favorable to him, being that Trump was more, doing the policies that he was enacting in terms of trying to take us out of multilateral agreements was more in alignment with what Putin's goal was. And so my only conclusion, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys have any other perspective on this, is that, after he saw Trump not get a second term, he knows that time is of the essence. This, of course, is part of this campaign to rebuild the USSR, what it was when the Soviet Union fell down, like in the early 1990s, late 80s. And, I'm just thinking about the fact that there are reports of people taking memorandums off Trump's desk to try to get his mind away from it until Trump would kind of bring it back up a few weeks or months later. Because, even, just to touch base on something else in the geopolitical arena, there were reports of him constantly asking, why do we have United States, personnel still in Korea? Why do we need to have stationed guards by the 39th parallel? All this lack of understanding of U.S. history post World War II was playing right into Putin's hands. And so in Biden's speech, that took place this week, this was President Biden's biggest stage of the past year, a chance to vouch to a wide audience for what his administration has accomplished. It was also an opportunity to try to turn around his own poor poll numbers. And I often say, when it comes down to polling, to really look at the trends, you got to look at trends. If you see something going consistent for like 2 or 3 months, then you're kind of seeing something. But whatever the flavor of the week is not really a good indicator of the popular consensus. Look at things from a perspective of, is this going on for a period of multiple months? And this has, this tanking poll number has been something that has been eating away at Biden for at least since the Afghanistan withdrawal. And so, this was an opportunity to try to turn around those numbers and reassure Democrats who are nervous about their party's chances in 2022 midterms. What are your thoughts on Biden's speech? Because what was also notable was that he did not call out Republicans or conservatives who are voicing kind of support for Vladimir Putin in this campaign. He also didn't do something like, stand up if you're for democracy, right? Stand up if you're for Ukraine, or remain seated if you support what Putin is doing. He didn't put them in an uncomfortable position. And I was wondering if you guys think that was a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, I think it was a missed opportunity, but it was an understandable miss because, to your point, he is working with a weak political hand domestically, and so he was aware of that. So, of course, he ran as a unifier, and we are almost at war. We all but at war. And so I think he was trying to not be overtly divisive by not doing that. And I think Putin, to an earlier point that you just raised, I think Putin's calculus there's some element of him understanding that he has some kind of latent support among Republicans. He has, if not latent support, that the United States is so divided politically that he could make this move now and not necessarily face not only a united allied front, but also not necessarily face a United States front. So I think that was part. I think that's part of his calculus. I mean, we can't. It's hard to get into Putin's head, but I'm also a little. I'm a little more than a little concerned about how this is playing out from a standpoint of I don't know. I don't think PR is the proper terminology, but Putin has become a pariah now to the quote unquote free world, and I don't see how he rehabilitates himself to the rest of the world. I don't see how that's possible now. I mean, you know, we're seeing the displacement of so far I think 1 million Ukrainians, and you know we're seeing videos of the bombing and all that kind of stuff. I don't see how he rehabilitates his image, and having him as a pariah makes him really dangerous. I mean, he was dangerous before, but because of the nuclear weapons that he possesses, but being a permanent pariah where he is never going to be seen as a rational or a rational player again on the world scene. I mean, it's just that portends some shaky stuff from my perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting because on Ukraine, basically the liberals are the hawks and the conservatives are more so the doves. And liberals don't really know how to be good hawks. I mean, the last good liberal hawk was Scoop Jackson, and most people don't even know who I'm talking about. So liberals don't play that hawkish hand well. And we're on this, and Nathan and Mike, this will sound familiar to you. We're on this continuum of diplomacy where if you have peace on one side, we've used sanctions here about as strongly as they've ever been used, which will cause not only his moral isolation, but his economic isolation. And as Dr. Cook pointed out, the economy of Russia is basically the same size as the economy of the state of New York. So Russia is not a world player economically, and they cannot afford to have a major recession, which has already begun there, which again makes Putin more dangerous. But I believe that the way we got here being and this will be highly unpopular amongst most of my people, but in my mind, this new Putin, this emboldened Putin, started basically in 2014 when President Obama let him off the hook with Syria and allowed Russia to be the intervener. To me, that's kind of like asking Barzini to help the Corleones with Tattaglia. It doesn't work. And you'd have to be a Godfather fan to get that, but study up. But President Obama let Putin know that Democratic presidents do not respond to strength with strength. And I think that I'm not a war hawk, but the track record of appeasement is also a record of danger.
No, I agree with you there, Brother Foster. I think, whether many folk in the Black community like it or not, Mr. Obama's failure to confront Mr. Putin, in 2014 is a significant contributor to this situation where we find the country is today. Mr. Putin is a very has always demonstrated himself to be a very strategic thinker, a very strategic guy. Too much of what American politics are about tend to be tactical and fit the moment as opposed to looking at the big picture. And what Mr. Putin saw was a weakness, an unwillingness on the part of the United States writ large to respond to his exertion of power for fear of whatever. And I think he reads the division in the country as being very useful for his strategic purposes. That again, it inhibits the ability of any particular U.S. president, however strong he or she may feel, from actually acting, because you can't rally the support, because he knows that internally here in this country, it's more important to harm your political enemy than it is to appear to be strong around the world. Because all they want to do is get power. So I think he's thought this through in a way that is very advantageous to his strategic vision, but I think it's difficult to impossible for him to realize his strategic vision, because I think there are certain other externalities that he didn't factor into. I don't think he factored into the equation the response of the rest of the world to the United States request, Joe Biden's request to be of assistance to try to turn him into a pariah, to isolate him. But once he gets really isolated, once you do all you can do to him except bomb Moscow, then I think you're absolutely right. You got a very dangerous guy, because there's nothing. He can never get invited to dinner with the Queen of England. He's not going to be invited to Versailles to chit chat with the president of France. He is done on that level. And so once he knows he can't do that, and he can't get into his yacht and ride around in the Black Sea or to go to Cannes, because they're going to confiscate his boat. So what has he got to lose? Why can't he be the biggest jerk that you ever saw?
Let me push back a little bit on what Professor Voss and Professor Cook just said. I thought about this in terms of, going back to 2014, did President Obama, fumble the ball here, and is that why? Or let me ask you, is it that, or is it the fact that when Trump was elected in 2016, before Trump was even sworn in, before he put his hand on the Bible, Michael Flynn was already making phone calls in December of 2016, telling what would be his counterpart in Russia, don't worry, once we get in there, we're going to take away those sanctions. Is that which one contributed more to the situation that's going on now?
They're all the same thing. They're all the same thing. Because Mr. Putin and his apparatus has always been trying to subvert the ability of the United States to respond to him. Donald Trump did not get elected solely because of Mr. Putin, but his participation helped. Part of this confusion that exists, in this division exists, is at the behest of the Russian infrastructure. So it's all of a piece for him. Like I said, he's very strategic. He has always been trying to figure out a way to undermine this thing, because he knows that Russia can never compete with the United States economically. It can never compete with the United States in the position it holds in the world. He's got to destroy it from the inside out. He's never going to confront it from the outside in.
I'd say it's a bit of both. Part of Putin does have an understanding with President Biden, because Biden was vice president during the Crimean annexation, which kind of kickstarted this whole conflict with Ukraine in the first place. He was vice president during the Arab Spring, which led to the Syrian civil war, where President Obama ultimately conceded Syria to Russia. So understanding that, and understanding that Obama didn't push back at him hard enough, led him to probably believe that Joe Biden also wouldn't, especially because Joe Biden isn't the generational politician the way Obama is. Biden doesn't have the ability to bring in large swaths of the American population simply based off of charisma. Biden doesn't have Obama's charisma. That's, well attested. But it's also the fact that he did have someone who was much more aligned with his goals and interests than Trump. So they're both blended, but it starts with Obama's unwillingness to push back against Putin's actions in 2014.
And this again is controversial, but I believe that in 2016, Putin's campaign was almost as much anti-Hillary as it was pro-Trump, because Hillary was the Secretary of State in Obama's first administration. She was hawkish towards Russia. Some of us have been called on to eat some crow this week because, if you recall, Mitt Romney said famously in that 2012 debate that Russia was the biggest strategic threat to the United States. It turns out to be right, not because Russia is necessarily positioned to be the biggest strategic threat, but because Putin is a former KGB agent who's hyper aggressive and will push the envelope unless someone pushes back. And again, I think Putin's calculus is that Democratic presidents won't push back, and Trump was extremely useful in dividing NATO and causing NATO allies to question their confidence in the United States as police of the world. So I just believe that Putin is convinced that he can have his way in the eastern half of the 1945 world.
Yeah.
Could you imagine? I just wanted, before Mr. Stephen Foster, you jump in, if Jesse Helms was still alive. I'm sorry, Jesse Helms, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee before Biden, right? Hawk from the 1980s, 1990s. I mean, could you, and not just him, but other Republicans who prided themselves in standing up to autocratic regime and freedom and supporting freedom and all these things. It's so topsy-turvy now. Professor Foster mentioned the Hawks. The Hawks are the Doves and the Doves are the Hawks now. If these folks raised from the dead for just one day, you can't help but think, what would they say? Mr. Foster?
Yeah. I was just going to harken back a little bit on what Obama did relative to Syria. That really wasn't a matter of standing up to Putin, because Putin Obama permitted Putin to let him off the hook. Remember, Obama had indicated that there was a line that a red line that they can't cross, the Syrians can't cross, relative to I think chemical WMD, and they crossed that line, and he let Putin be the go-between. So that really wasn't a standing up to Putin. It was he used Putin, but Putin actually used him. That's really what happened. And so, I mean, there may have been other times, I'm thinking of Crimea, where President Obama didn't stand up to Putin, but that Syria incident was not quite that.
Yeah,
Someone also made. Go ahead.
And the right wingers. I mean, I'm not sure how they would respond, because those guys were like, they hated commies. Okay, and the challenge right now is Putin is not a commie. Mike Pompeo was fawning over Putin like Donald Trump did, and was being chased down the hall, I think, in one of the Senate office buildings, and was asked by a reporter, well, did you think your comments about Mr. Putin were helping him and supporting him in his thing in the Ukraine? And Mike Pompeo looks at him, he's very stern. He says, I fought communists since I was 16 years old. Now, the problem with that response is it's not responsive, because Putin is not a communist. Putin is an autocrat. Putin is a gangster thug oligarch, okay? But their brain is still stuck on, we got to fight communists. And he's not a communist. And I think many of these so-called hawks would be very confused about, well, what do we do with this guy? Because he looks like us in the sense that, and that's where you get this whole right-wing Christian nationalist thing. He's a strong guy. He's masculine. He's trying to preserve his people. And they get really kind of twisted into, well, maybe that's not such a bad place to be. We kind of like that kind of guy. because he's not saying, you know, the government has to control all the means of production and distribution. He's saying, you know, go out, get rich, make a lot of money, and keep those others out of your country.
Yeah, that's it. See, Putin is not a Bolshevik. You know, Putin is by no means a Bolshevik. So, you know, though, and I think a lot of the right wing now, thanks to Trump, understand that. They get that. That's why the pushback is not what it would have been had Jesse Helms and those staunch anti-communists been around now. It's not anything, not anywhere near it, because they recognize now that Putin is actually a white nationalist. I mean, he's a nationalist, and he's a white nationalist, obviously. But you know, and he has some theocratic overtones, you know, to his rhetoric. You know, some of that cultural stuff. You know, he sings the same song out of the same hymnal they do. So I think they recognize that now, but they see that this is blatant and unprovoked aggression. And, you know, NATO, we are NATO. And so they're in a tough place ideologically now, to Professor Cook's point.
And another thing that, Professor Foster, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Being used by Putin as his red line, meaning that NATO, you're not coming past this line. He's drawing his line to protect, in his mind, the Eastern Empire from the Western Empire. And as Stephen said earlier, the Western Empire has been growing eastward. So from his point of view, politically, it looks like I'm protecting us from the Western invaders who basically reneged on what was agreed to in terms of spheres of control and influence.
Yeah. And even in Biden's speech, when he said, you know, we will defend every inch of NATO territory, taking a strong, you know, making a clear, you know, message to Putin that if you plan on carrying this agenda and this campaign of yours further and further, like we're talking about the democratic states that were liberated in the 1990s and were established, you're in for a rude awakening. But what's also interesting is that Biden also kind of made some, in my mind, some concessions to the right in that Biden was saying, look, we need to fund the police. We need to, he emphasized the need to secure our borders. I mean, and of course, this is all, you know, political chess, being that we're some months out from the midterms. And, you know, in addition to the inflation that's going on, in addition to Republicans making this caricature of Democrats being soft or incompetent when it comes down to foreign affairs, as evident by the chaotic, you know, Afghan withdrawal, Biden is kind of positioning folks to say, look, go out and campaign on the fact that, yeah, we want your borders secure, but we differ on how to secure them. Yeah, we want the police to be funded, but we also want there to be some accountability in the streets so that Black mothers and fathers are not experiencing, you know, the death of their children from some hot-headed cop, right? So he's going out there and making this case for the Democratic Party to take the lead from. But it kind of reminded me of Bill Clinton's 1996 State of the Union. I think it was 96. I think that was his longest the longest State of the Union address, where he said the era of big government is over. And he got a rousing applause from the Republicans. When I saw Ted Cruz and Mike Lee stand up to Biden saying we're going to fund the police, that just kind of brought my mind back to that moment. But I want to get your thoughts. Did Biden concede to the right in saying that we need to fund the police and emphasizing the need to secure our borders?
He did, in the sense that, you know, Democrats weren't running on defund the police. That was it was really an academic proposal that various activists were proposing, that conservative activists then took and ran with it as the big attack line. There still really isn't much evidence that it's what cost the Democrats the majority, despite what Jim Clyburn wants everyone to believe. But, you know, it worked very well as an attack line. The Democrats not only aren't good hawks, they don't counterpunch well either. You know, they don't play defense well. They don't really play offense well either. They kind of just, they sit there. And so, you know, the fact that so many Democratic incumbents, who, by the way, most of the Democratic incumbents which lost were from the Biden wing of the party that didn't support defund the police, as opposed to the AOC, Cori Bush, Ayanna Pressley wing that said, hey, maybe we should hear these people out, is that the reason they lost their seats is because they didn't have anything to say in response other than, no, I don't. And once it becomes he said, she said, the person who speaks up first is the one who gets believed. So it was a concession in that sense. And it's also a concession in the sense that Biden is the one who ran as the consensus builder. You know, everyone likes Joe was the whole thing, you know? And since everyone currently does not like Joe, he's trying to rebuild that, what he views as that sensible center, which he views as the his key to a winning majority. So it was a good speech from that standpoint, but the, you know, things that didn't get addressed were the Democratic priorities. Biden didn't say abortion during his speech. You know, he still hasn't said the word abortion during his presidency. He mentioned that women's rights to choose are under attack, but a woman's right to choose what? You know, a woman's right to choose is 5 words, abortion is 1. So you can't even make the time-saving argument because abortion is, you know, 1 simple word. And he also didn't address his key constituency, the constituency that not only handed him the White House, but handed him the Democratic nomination. He didn't talk very much about what he's done for Black voters. He didn't focus on the child tax credit, which he claims has lifted Black people, well, Americans of all stripes, but especially Black Americans, out of poverty. And he barely touched on the fact that he has nominated the first Black woman to the Supreme Court. So this was a speech for rebuilding the sensible center, but not the speech for rebuilding his support among the constituency he really needs, which is Black voters.
Oh, Professor Cook, unmute.
Yeah, but that's not what the State of the Union speech is. I mean, you're talking about a convention speech for rallying the party. That's different than a State of the Union speech. I think the State of the Union speech, to borrow a legal phrase, is largely bullshit. But that's what he did. And okay, you know, but I don't think there's much utility in critiquing it or analyzing it because it's a nothing burger. What really needs to get focused on is what is he doing or not doing, irrespective of his speech. And he said a lot of crazy stuff that people say in these speeches, but I think he is much more deserving of critique about the policies that he has implemented, the policies he's pushed, and the policies, quite frankly, he has not pushed, that are going to affect the constituents that he might expect would vote for him.
Yeah, and it goes without mention that, you know, a lot of people were saying he needs a reset. You know, being that Joe Manchin went on Fox and said, "Look, I can't do this. I can't support the Build Back Better agenda," right? So the speech was often, before he even spoke, talked about in terms of this chance to kind of bring back bits and pieces of that agenda without using the framework, without using the title Build Back Better, and kind of trying to get this piecemeal agenda through. So, you know, he talked about lowering prescription drug costs. You know, that's something that, you know, older conservative folks are all 100% for. And you know, Democrats don't really have, you know, they're for healthcare, so they're not going to oppose that. So it's like, that was something that could get bipartisanship, and then the making childcare more affordable, raising taxes on the wealthy. And he says, you know, I'm not trying to punish anybody, you know, but, you know, pay your fair share, as he says, fighting climate change, trying to really take the soft in the middle approach, trying to leaning in hard on what people say that why Biden voted for. Oh, why people voted for Biden. They say we didn't vote for an FDR, according to Republican senators. We didn't vote for Biden to be an FDR. We wanted him to be this kind of squishy, moderate figure that can make us a little comfortable, so that in 4 years we can put Trump back in again. And so it's strange because, you know, at the same time, you know, he's trying to get these big, bold agenda items through, but, you know, it's like, it's like Lyndon Johnson said, I'd rather have folks, you know, inside, you fill in the blank, out than outside in. And he has got folks in his own party who are sabotaging him. And you would not see this happen if we had a Republican president. Like, they were all in lockstep with that 2017 tax cut. Not one person stood out and said, this is going to really do damage to the economy. I think we're moving with this bill too fast. I think we need to pull the brakes a little bit and look at these. Not one Republican would do that, right? But when it comes down to the Democrats, all of a sudden we get folks like Manchin, Sinema, who want to stop everything. And even the fact that Manchin's sitting with Republicans is symbolic of, to me, where he stands. Go ahead.
Mike, can you imagine Lyndon Johnson allowing Joe Manchin to stop his agenda? I mean, think about this. Lyndon Johnson ran for president and got reelected the year he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There has never been a Civil Rights Act more controversial than that. That's what ended Jim Crow. And the way to be a good moderate is to run hard to the left and hard to the right. This walking meekly down the middle is attractive to no one. So unless the president is ready to use his bully pulpit to satisfy the people who put him in the White House, and all we're really asking for is to get back to sea level with voting rights. I mean, we're asking to get back to pre-2013 levels of enforcement by the federal government for voting rights. I mean, that doesn't seem to be like a really radical agenda, yet Joe Manchin is allowed to pump the president publicly. And Kristen Sinema, I just can't imagine Lyndon Johnson letting them walk out of the White House and live.
Kristen Sinema does not, and I know folks might look at this years later, but to me, Kristen Sinema does not belong in the United States Senate. Even when the cabinet's walking down the aisle and she's just tackily I'm like, what are you doing there? Honestly,
but how does Kristen Sinema not belong in the Senate?
Because
Tommy Tuberville does belong in the Senate.
Oh, I never said he did.
There's a bunch of bozos that don't belong in the Senate. Kristen Sinema just happens to be one of them.
Well, I'm saying you're a Democrat, right? The bar is so low for Republicans that I'm not even expecting some kind of. I'm talking about you took the DNC's campaign money, you took it, and you're not having any kind of town hall back home. You're not doing anything with that money. You're not living up to the platform. You're not. It's kind of like Southerners would say you're not sticking with the folks that brought you to the dance, and then you're stepping on the other folks' foot. So who are you for at the end? Like what are you running on when it's time to knock on doors and ask for donations again? But to Professor Foster's point, voting rights, yes, I mean that got a passing mention. In President Biden's State of the Union, he said the most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and to have it counted, and it's under assault. And state after state, new laws have been passed not only to suppress the vote, and so he didn't double down on that. He didn't emphasize why. To me, if I was in the Biden administration, correct me if I'm wrong, I would actually advocate for taking a piece of the John Lewis bill, say the preclearance clause, right? The part of the bill that says every state that had a history of discrimination has to double check with the DOJ in order to implement new changes. Just take that one piece and run on it. Like make that the center of the campaign for this year. And then once you get that passed, then we can focus on the rest of the legislation. But let's get this one part of the legislation in first, and then we'll get the rest done.
I'm sorry I'm so animated on this, but the Democrats should have been just showing America exactly what happened the month after preclearance was declared unconstitutional. It's the very states that were under preclearance that immediately started suppressing Black votes. And I mean, that should be an easy narrative to tell, but if you're embarrassed by where you stand, maybe you shouldn't be standing there.
Well, look, Joe Biden is by all accounts, a nice guy, a kind of guy you'd like to sit around and have a beer with and shoot the breeze with, that kind of stuff. But if you look at his history, and he's got a long 40-odd years in public life, he has very seldom started off at the right place as far as I'm concerned. He oftentimes winds up at the right place, but he does not start off at the right place because it's intuitively not who he is. He believes, I think, that what he says, that he believes that voting is important and voting rights are important, but he does not believe that it's worth fighting for the way you and I, the people on this thing called this Zoom call, believe. He's not invested in it that way because he's much more invested in the club that is the United States Senate, in getting along and horse trading around the edges, but really not focusing on it. And so, you know, I don't dislike Joe Biden. I think that he is just Lyndon Johnson was an example of this. I think when the country is in very difficult times, you need a great leader. And sometimes that leader is identifiable before the crisis happens. And you can say, well, you need him or her because they're a great leader. And sometimes the circumstances create great leadership. Joe Biden does not have that extraordinary ability. Doesn't make him a horrible human being, but he is not an extraordinary person who is going to rise to the occasion and confront the crises that exist in his country at the moment. That's just not who he is. He's a get along, go along to get along kind of guy. Let's all sit together and try to work this out. And if the other guy is really tougher than Joe, when I say tougher, not because he's got some institutional flaw, but the other guy is really more tough-minded than Joe and has a strategy that is going to make Joe stop, he'll stop. It's just who he is. And it's unfortunate for where we are as a society, where we are as a country, where poor and minority people are in this country, that we don't have that kind of leadership that is sort of transformational, but that's not who he is.
Yeah. Mr. Foster?
Yeah, the evidence of that, of course, was his failure to bring Manchin and Sinema along. That's the evidence of that. I mean, but we need to not ignore the pink elephant in the room. The Democrats are playing a very weak political hand because this is not 1964. You know, when in 1964, there were a lot of white Democrats in the South, even. You know, I mean, now the Democratic Party exists only because of practically unanimous black support. 40% of white people vote Democrat. 60% of white people vote Republican. I mean, you can go back as far as you want to go in recent presidential history, and you know that's clear. And it's you know, Trump began to realize and capitalize on that. But that's the inherent weakness of the Democratic Party. Joe Sinema lives or represents a state, and I've mentioned this before on here, but he represents a state where, you know, the black population is about 3 or 4%, you know, so he doesn't get elected by black people. And, you know, we ignore this, but this has ripple effects. And this is why the Democratic agenda is always in jeopardy. And this is the inherently weak hand that Joe Biden plays. But to Professor Cook's point, a more transformational, even white leader in the Democratic Party, perhaps you know, even a younger image might have been able to do this. But you know, we hired Joe Biden to do one thing, and he's done that one thing.
And so I want to talk about the Supreme Court fight that's about to take place. I know the hearings are about to start on the 21st of this month. What was interesting about this situation was that, you know, of course, President Biden, well, going back to the election of 2020, Jim Clyburn, according to the accounts by Bob Woodward in his latest work, latest book, I have it with me, Peril. And this account was also corroborated in other situations where, you know, they're at the South Carolina debate, right? Joe Biden is fighting for his political life. We didn't get to the South Carolina primary yet. We had just got through Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And Jim Clyburn in the commercial break, makes a beeline to President Biden. Buttigieg tries to come and intervene and tries to greet Congressman Clyburn. He kind of sidesteps him out the way and tells Biden, if you don't make this promise, your candidacy is basically going to tank. You need to go out there and say you're going to choose a black woman for the Supreme Court. And Joe Biden goes out and does that, right? And so he has made good on that promise, despite the uproar of criticism from the right, that, this is like affirmative action. This is, the very thing that they oppose, because this is not about the content of her character. This is about the fact that she is a black woman. And, they were making up all kinds of opposition to Biden's decision to do this. Now, what made this also interesting is that Lindsey Graham comes out and says, I'm with Jim Clyburn. I want to get Michelle Childs on the court. and so I think in my mind, he did that to kind of put Biden on blast, to kind of say, look, you're about bipartisanship. I just endorsed somebody that someone who's in your ear has also put their, support behind. And so if you oppose me in this, then you're not looking for bipartisanship. You're looking for your own liberal, radical left agenda, right? Now, what was also interesting is that Biden is a very personal politician. Everything is about, relationships. And so what I read was that, Biden made a joke after the election and says, I'm the dog that finally caught the car. And Lindsey Graham laughs, and and then Biden says, what happened to us, Lindsey? We used to be friends. And then, they start to talk, and Lindsey Graham says, I am your friend. And then Lindsey Graham says, but if Ivanka Trump or if Eric Trump did what Hunter did, and Biden says, okay, that's it. And that's it. The relationship is over. Cut him off. So I think that played a role in the fact that Biden's like, I really don't even, it's kind of like, forgive me for, making this crass reference, but it's kind of like putting his middle finger up at Lindsey Graham and saying, I'm not interested in your bipartisanship. I'm choosing who I want for this position. And so we've got Judge Ketanji Brown, who sits on the appeals for the DC Circuit, who had Merrick Garland's seat, ironically, who was robbed of that nomination, robbed of that process. What are your thoughts on this new justice? She was confirmed with bipartisan support for the current position she has on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit just last year. What are your thoughts?
I want to see her LSAT scores.
I heard Tucker Carlson. My response to Tucker Carlson is I want to see Tucker Carlson's first grade report card scores.
All of us who are burdened with a law degree know that the LSAT score is important until the day you go to law school. And after that, nobody cares what your LSAT score is. After the first day, it's irrelevant. But look, Ketanji Brown is an eminently qualified, overqualified, because the bar to be a Supreme Court justice is unfortunately remarkably low, because most people don't realize it. You don't even have to be a lawyer. I mean, so it's incredibly low. It's whatever a majority of the U.S. Senate says it is. I mean, if they want you in, you're in. But she is certainly qualified to be a Supreme Court justice. And the Republicans are going to continue to do what they do to fight this, because it's in their political interest to play racial and gender politics. We talk about, and I hate to do this to you, Mike. You said she was selected with the bipartisanship. It was 53 to 47. That's not bipartisan. That's that's working around the edges. There's no real commitment to it. But none of these Republicans will suffer any negative consequences for harassing this woman, voting against this woman. None of them. And it may wind up that there'll be 53 more votes this time. Okay, that's fine. But I don't give Susan Collins, I don't give Murkowski, I don't give Mitt Romney, I don't give any of them any credit for doing something that they should have done anyway. They don't get any credit from me for that. There's no bravery in that.
Well, I'm really glad it was Judge Jackson and not, Judge Childs. Personally, Judge Jackson's rulings have fallen a little bit more on the progressive side. She is someone who's been a past public defender. She's someone who's whose rulings have been very pro-defendant. They've been very pro-labor. So, I'm happy about that. It's also interesting that you mentioned Merrick Garland, because Judge Jackson was actually also under consideration for that same seat. The only reason Obama went with Garland was because Garland was the one he thought Republicans were more likely to confirm. Garland was, on the wrong side of 60. He was someone who was known as an incredibly moderate judge. So for a seat that would have tilted the balance of the Supreme Court 5-4 liberal appointees, Garland was the kind of guy who you could expect to be a swing vote in the style of Kennedy or Sandra Day O'Connor. Ultimately, I think Obama should have selected Jackson anyway. That would have gotten the base a little more fired up than your average Merrick Garland, who today gets the Democratic base fired up for all the wrong reasons. But it's interesting. I give Biden credit for not kind of bending to the pressure of selecting Judge Childs, because Clyburn and Graham had kind of created this environment where anyone but Childs is unconfirmable. Instead, however, Biden kind of understood, I guess, in the back of his head, and this is something else where his experience plays in, because his two big areas of expertise in the Senate was judges and foreign policy. He said, you know what, I can't actually trust the Republicans are going to vote the way Lindsey Graham is saying they're going to vote. We don't need 60 votes to put a judge in the Supreme Court. We only need 50 plus 1. So if Judge Jackson only gets 50 plus 1, and I know for a fact, Joe and Kirsten aren't going to do anything crazy, I can, put whoever I want. He could have even put Justice Kruger from California, who's only 45, and that would have been the kind of, decision that he could have made, even if it wouldn't have been incredibly popular with certain segments of the right. Now, the big thing for Judge Jackson with me is that she's only 51. If she serves in 27 years, which is the length of time that Justice Ginsburg served, I think it's also the length of time that Justice Breyer served, she won't even be 80 years old. That's somebody who you can get who can be the lead, who can be the torchbearer of the court's liberal wing for a very long time, someone who can write opinions that one day become the majority opinion and therefore the law. And she is someone who's eminently qualified. She ticks off all the right boxes. She's a double Harvard grad. She was law review editor. She has a big law history. She's been a public defender. She has passed Senate confirmation. I think that was the tiebreaker for her, because she's the only person on the shortlist who has been confirmed to a judgeship by this Senate. So I think that's what kind of put her over Childs or Kruger.
And it's interesting, when I look at things like this, I can't help but look at the irony throughout history in that, Biden, of course, was the former chair of the Judiciary Committee. And, he's gotten a lot of heat, his history, his in the Senate as a presidential candidate 3 times. I mean, the last 2 times after 1988, 2008 and 2020. He got a lot of heat about the way he handled the Anita Hill confirmation, the Anita Hill allegations, right? So now here we have redemption in that it is not a symbolic, kind of like move. This is like something that's concrete. This is like this is a lifetime appointment, and he's giving it to a Black woman. And in that way, it's kind of like almost like a move to redeem himself in that sense. For a lot of people, including Anita Hill, who still say to this day that he hasn't apologized the way he should have apologized, right? So that being said, I just wanted to throw that in there. Anyone else?
Yeah, Joe Biden also kept Judge Rogers Brown from possibly being the first Black female Supreme Court justice. She was a justice on the California Supreme Court. They brought her out here to put her on the circuit court as a way on the DC circuit as a way to get her to the Supreme Court. But it took an agreement of the Gang of 14 senators decided that they would not vote to filibuster a bunch of judgeships, including Judge Brown. Again, it's part of Joe's history. I mean, I think he behaved shamefully with respect to the Anita Hill matter. I mean, I lived through it. I worked on the part of the team. He was shameful. and he has not really sort of acknowledged how badly he behaved and expressed true regret for it. I mean, he said the political thing, well, it really wasn't a good day for me kind of thing. But it was awful what he's done. So, you know, he isn't this champion. I think his people around him, Ron Klain et al., decided a long time ago that Ketanji Brown was going to be the Supreme Court nominee to fill his promise made to Jim Clyburn. And all this other noise around Judge Childs, around Judge Kruger, Mike Taylor will appreciate this, our dean at the School of Law at the Howard University's name was floated around. All that was all atmospherics. It was fine. But he wasn't, but Ron Klain knew what Joe Biden knew, what Mr. Honore said. You can't trust the Republicans. Do not give them the opportunity to jam you when the votes come down. So if it's 50-50 and the vice president breaks the tie, that's good enough. And that was always, I think, Ron Klain's strategy. And he's sort of Joe Biden's brain on this.
Professor Foster, how is Mr. McConnell going to behave this spring?
Predictably, I mean, they're going to put up a good fight. They're going to raise a lot of money off of fighting Judge Brown Jackson, even if they lose. And you see, I qualified that because I don't have full confidence that even this will happen. It should happen. There's no reason why it shouldn't. But Mitch McConnell, you can be sure, will be taking his cuts. And if there's a way to sabotage it, he will be prepared to do it. So I don't really count this, and please don't get me wrong. I'm happy with Judge Brown Jackson's nomination. She deserves it fully. She's overqualified, but I don't see this as an accomplishment. I see this as a political payback that was due. Clyburn gave Joe Biden the presidency, period, for that promise. I will be impressed when we get voting rights passed. Fulfilling a promise that you alone are positioned to fulfill is not a major accomplishment. It's minimalism.
And what's also interesting, as we're concluding the show, is that the January 6th committee says it found evidence showing that Trump committed crimes, including obstruction and fraud, while trying to overturn the election. The House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot said in a new court filing today that it believes former President Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election resulted in violated several laws. The panel said that the evidence that it gathered so far suggests that the former president tried to obstruct an official proceeding, conspired to defraud the United States, and engaged in common law fraud. The facts we've gathered strongly suggest that Dr. Eastman's emails show that he helped Donald Trump advance a corrupt scheme to obstruct the counting of electoral college ballots and a conspiracy to impede the transfer of power. That's Representative Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney, who are the ranking members on that committee. You know what's interesting in that when I'm going, and even the fact that Bill Barr in this interview with Lester Holt is now all of a sudden revealing what it was like to be in the room with Trump just before he was told to resign. And even in this book, I was reading it today, chapter 39. Barr tells Trump, chapter 33. There's nothing there. He was saying Trump was saying, I saw boxes in Michigan and Detroit. And he said, Mr. President, the fact that you saw boxes doesn't mean anything because that's how they count the votes. They take them in. It's customary for them to do this early and around 6 a.m. where they take the boxes in to be counted. And so the fact that you or your supporters saw boxes does not indicate fraud. It's just what they do, And so, line after line, every time Trump brought up something, Barr would refute it, and Trump was getting infuriated with Barr, right? So now there was a moment where Trump brings in Barr, and flanked to the table is Mark Meadows, two White House lawyers, other representatives who are filling Trump with these ideas that there's hope somewhere that he can somehow steal the election. And Barr's on the other side, and Trump says, "Did you go on TV and say that there's no evidence of fraud?" And Barr said, "Yes." He said, "Why did you do that?" Because it's just true. There's nothing there. Well, you didn't have to say that. That's what he said. You didn't have to say that. You could have just said no comment. And so now Barr is saying that, he's giving more details in terms of what happened that time. I want to get your thoughts on what's going on, because oftentimes we've seen these investigations go on and only to kind of cloud them or go over people's heads because it's so convoluted or complex. And at the end of the day, there's no specific tangible charge you can bring against Trump or any of his associates. But now apparently there's some there. Any thoughts?
There was there in impeachment 1. There was there in impeachment 2. There was there with the Mueller report. We've seen this movie. The thing is, if the Democrats lose the House in November, this thing is over. This investigation, no matter how dead to rights they have him, and they obviously have him dead to rights on a number of fronts, the thing ends, after the election. It's incredible, but, and I hate to be so cynical, but it is what it is.
Valid observation. I mean, the ball shifts. The ball shifts to the court of Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice. Does this investigation create sufficient facts to generate probable cause to charge the president or any number of other people with criminal offenses under the United States Code? And that is something that Merrick Garland is going to have to wrestle with as the head of the Justice Department. There are a lot of people. Well, let me not be Trumpian. There are lawyers I know who I've spoken to about this who've been criminal law practitioners, who worked in justice, who worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, who don't believe Merrick Garland has the stones to prosecute Donald Trump. Not because there's not a crime, but because he doesn't believe in this. He is too much of an institutionalist to actually charge a former president with a crime. And that may be true, and it may not. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he does have the stones, but this may not go anywhere, as we've just talked about, not because there's not a crime there, but because the people who control the levers of power to prosecute him are unwilling to do that.
Yeah, and this is the danger of this so-called moderation, because when the country is in the middle of a slow-moving insurrection, it is not time to be moderate. And even if he does move, to Stephen's point, it's already late. The time factor of this, if he starts moving now, the trial could possibly begin by the midterm elections. And I think that would be early. So as Stephen says, even if he moves on it, it would have to be in the criminal realm, because in the political realm, there will be no answer likely after November.
And just to put in perspective in terms of what Dr. Eastman was proposing, this made Mike Lee, Ted Cruz's best buddy in the Senate, who was a staunch conservative, staunch Tea Partier. He said that one of the proposals was, at the end, Pence announces that because of the ongoing disputes in 7 states, there are no electors that can be deemed validly appointed to those states. That means the total number of electors appointed, the language of the 12th Amendment, is 454. This reading of the 12th Amendment has also been advanced by Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe. A majority of the electors appointed would therefore be 228. There, at this point, 232 votes for Trump, 222 votes for Biden. Pence then gavels President Trump as reelected. This was the most stark and scary scenario to Mike Lee. And Mike Lee was trying to be the voice of reason. So, I mean, you could just imagine how bizarre, this White House was in that transition period. Anyone else as we're closing?
We've seen this movie before, as Professor Cook and Mr. Foster have all said, that we've seen all sorts of investigations into Trump's activities and with nothing. So as much information as the Select Committee has, I think there's for me personally, I'm not going to believe Trump is going to face any kind of personal or criminal accountability until I hear a jury of his peers say the word guilty. But one thing I believe personally is that the Select Committee has not done enough to make their case to the people, because that's the other thing that you need to do. You know, when you have this kind of council, you need to make it a spectacle, like what the Republicans of Benghazi. They knew there was nothing there, but they knew that Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, was running for president, and they really didn't want it to have to say President Clinton again. So they made a spectacle out of what was nothing. Well, Democrats have something. Donald Trump, stood at the Oval, said, let's go in there and, disturb this thing, and let's, make Mike Pence overturn the election. People came in and stormed the Capitol, overwhelmed the police presence that was there, that was expecting, fist fights and rocks and bottles, and not tear gas and, everything else they brought in there. And, so there is something, but there's no spectacle. We haven't had a large scale of public hearings. They haven't been announcing who they're bringing in to talk to. There really has not been much on that front. You need to convince. It's not enough to convince a judge or a grand jury that you have a case. You need to convince the people that you're doing this for that you have a case. And the people that you're doing this for, not just the American people, but the Democratic base that really wants to see Trump, in an orange jumpsuit.
Well, Professor Foster, Mr. Stephen Foster, Professor Fred Cook, Nate Honore, it has been a privilege and honor to have you all tonight. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. But just before we end, I did promise that I would reveal the answer to the question asked earlier about which U.S. president was responsible for convincing the Olympic Committee in 1980, to withdraw from engaging in the Olympics because of Russia's invasion of the Soviet Union. The answer is President Jimmy Carter. And I want to congratulate Ms. Danielle Nicole. Please go ahead and inbox me your address. I'm going to send you one of these really nice masks. The Political Mic logo is on the mask. We hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you all for what you've brought to the show tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. With that being said, have a good evening. Stay engaged. And tune in next week, same time next week, to the Political Mic. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.